On a cold December morning in 2025, global financial markets were rocked, not by an earthquake, but by a headline that would send shockwaves across continents. Russia had launched targeted retaliation against European corporate assets, catching investors and governments off guard. The world watched in disbelief as the news broke, realizing that the rules of global finance were about to change. This was a direct and forceful response to the European Union's unprecedented decision to seize profits from frozen Russian reserves, a move that many experts warned had crossed a dangerous line in international finance. The tit-for-tat escalation was no longer theoretical, it was unfolding in real time. Within hours, commodity prices soared to levels not seen in years, European banking stocks plunged, and the West's long-held sense of financial invulnerability was suddenly in question. Investors scrambled to make sense of the chaos, while markets from London to Frankfurt reeled from the impact. What began as a calculated economic sanction had now triggered a full-blown financial confrontation, with both sides digging in and preparing for further escalation. The world's financial order was being tested as never before. Central bankers scrambled to contain the fallout, emergency meetings were called in capitals across Europe, and European corporations with Russian operations suddenly found themselves in the crosshairs of a geopolitical storm. The sense of urgency was palpable. Russia's retaliation was surgical and strategic, targeting specific companies and sectors to maximize political impact and sow discord within the EU. The message was clear: no one was immune from the consequences of economic warfare. The unity of the European Union began to fray as member states openly debated the wisdom of the original seizure. Old divisions resurfaced, and the pressure on EU leadership mounted with every passing hour. The real shock wasn't just the billions lost in a single day, it was the collapse of the assumption that Western financial institutions were untouchable sanctuaries for global capital. The very foundation of trust in the system was shaken. The weaponization of finance had reached a terrifying new level, with every transaction and asset now a potential target in a rapidly escalating conflict. The tremors of this day signaled not just a crisis, but the birth of a more dangerous, unpredictable, and uncertain financial world order, one where the old rules no longer applied, and the future was anything but secure. The EU's decision to redirect profits from frozen Russian assets was driven by moral outrage and economic necessity. With $300 billion in Russian reserves frozen, the idea emerged: use Russia's own money to fund Ukraine's recovery. Legal debates raged, but the EU argued that seizing only the profits, not the principal, was a justifiable gray area. Critics warned this would set a dangerous precedent, undermining the trust that underpins the global financial system. Many feared it would push countries to seek alternatives to the euro and dollar, eroding Western financial dominance. Despite these warnings, the EU approved the transfer of over $100 billion in profits to Ukraine. The move was hailed as bold, but a sense of foreboding lingered. The EU had crossed a financial Rubicon. The question was no longer if Russia would retaliate, but how, and at what cost. The stage was set for a historic confrontation. Moscow's response was swift and precise, mirror retaliation, but with a twist. The Kremlin wasted no time in signaling that it would not simply accept the EU's actions passively. Instead, Russian officials convened emergency meetings, determined to send a clear message to both domestic and international audiences. Rather than seizing European sovereign assets, Russia took a calculated approach, targeting the corporate holdings of EU multinationals operating within its borders. This was a move designed to hit where it hurt most, at the heart of European business interests in Russia. Strategic companies in energy, manufacturing, and banking, sectors vital to both Russia and Europe, were swiftly placed under state-appointed management. In effect, this amounted to a thinly veiled nationalization, sending shockwaves through the international business community. This move mirrored the EU's own legal justifications, directly challenging the sanctity of private property. Just as the EU had previously challenged the principle of sovereign immunity, Russia was making it clear that two could play this game. The targets were not random. They were carefully chosen to maximize political leverage, focusing on national champions from Germany, France, and Italy, countries with the most to lose and the most influence in Brussels. The message was unmistakable: your leaders' decisions in Brussels will have real consequences for your workers and your economies back home. Factories closed, jobs were lost, and uncertainty spread among European employees in Russia. As the economic pain became personal, domestic pressure began to mount on EU governments. Families worried about their livelihoods, and protests erupted in several European cities, demanding action and accountability. The psychological impact was profound. While Russia had clearly prepared for this scenario, the West found itself caught off guard, scrambling to respond to the rapidly evolving crisis. The old rules of global business were being rewritten in real time. Markets reacted with volatility, and boardrooms across Europe and beyond were thrown into chaos as the new reality set in. The battlefield had shifted decisively, from sovereign finance to corporate assets, exposing Europe's vulnerabilities in a way few had anticipated. The world was watching as a new era of economic confrontation unfolded. European corporations faced immediate devastation as their Russian investments were seized overnight. Stock prices of targeted firms collapsed, erasing billions in value. CEOs were powerless, and governments could offer little more than words. The pain rippled through supply chains, triggering bankruptcies and job losses across Europe. The crisis ignited political infighting within the EU, as affected countries questioned the wisdom of the asset seizure. Business lobbies in major economies demanded a reassessment of the EU's strategy. The era of frictionless globalization was over. Political risk was now a daily reality. Companies began to rethink their global footprints, prioritizing security over efficiency. The corporate world was being forcibly deglobalized. Seizing profits from Russia's frozen assets shattered a core principle of global finance: sovereign immunity. This principle, long considered inviolable, was the bedrock upon which nations trusted each other with their wealth. For decades, central bank reserves were seen as untouchable, a sacred trust that underpinned the stability of international trade and finance. Countries felt secure knowing their assets would be protected, regardless of political tensions or conflicts. The EU's move, widely viewed as a legal workaround, blurred the line between a temporary freeze and outright permanent seizure. What was once a technical measure became a precedent-setting action with far-reaching consequences. This sent a powerful signal to the world. The West could alter the rules of the game when it suited its interests, even if it meant undermining established norms. Central banks from Beijing to Brasilia watched with growing alarm, realizing that their own reserves could be vulnerable to similar actions for political reasons. The sense of security they once felt was now deeply shaken. The perception of Western assets as safe havens was now in serious doubt. Investors and governments alike began to question whether their money was truly protected. U.S. treasuries and German bonds, once the gold standard of safety, were no longer immune to the unpredictable forces of geopolitics. Their status as risk-free assets was now under scrutiny. The sanctity of sovereign assets became a conditional privilege, not an absolute guarantee. Trust, once automatic, now depended on shifting political winds and alliances. This didn't trigger an immediate exodus of capital, but it planted a seed of doubt in the minds of policymakers and investors worldwide. The foundation of global finance had been quietly but fundamentally altered. The world began to rethink its reliance on a financial system that could be weaponized at a moment's notice, questioning whether true safety could ever be guaranteed again. The true long-term impact was a silent, global shift in reserve management. Central banks, especially in the global South and Asia, began quietly diversifying away from dollars and euros. Gold became the asset of choice, immune to sanctions, free from counterparty risk. Nations repatriated gold from Western vaults, signaling distrust in traditional custodians. The Chinese yuan gained ground, and countries struck more trade deals in local currencies. Financial centers like Singapore and Zurich saw an influx of capital seeking neutrality. The global map of finance was being redrawn, with new safe havens emerging. The world was moving toward a multipolar currency system, less dominated by the West. The quiet exodus was underway. The financial conflict spilled into energy and trade, accelerating Russia's pivot from Europe. Moscow demanded payment for energy exports in non-Western currencies, sidelining the dollar and euro. Alternative payment systems like Russia's SPFS and China's CIPS gained traction, bypassing Western controls. Europe, cut off from Russian energy, faced soaring prices and new competitive disadvantages. The euro's international status began to erode as more trade settled outside its framework. Global trade became fragmented. Brazilian soybeans sold in yuan, South African minerals in rupees. Businesses faced new currency risks and transaction costs. The era of a unified global market was ending, replaced by regional blocs, with their own currencies and systems. The weaponization of finance had boomeranged, complicating trade for all. the world's financial plumbing was being rebuilt on new, uncertain foundations. The EU's asset seizure sparked fierce debate: moral imperative or catastrophic mistake. Supporters saw it as justice, using Russia's money to rebuild Ukraine and punish aggression. The seized profits offered a lifeline for Ukraine's shattered economy. Proponents argued that defending freedom justified the risks to the financial system. Critics warned the EU had sacrificed global trust for short-term gain. By politicizing the euro, Europe gave non-Western nations reason to diversify away. The West's credibility as a neutral financial power was undermined. The decision, critics said, might accelerate the decline of Western financial dominance. Was it a necessary stand, or a Pyrrhic victory that damaged the very system it sought to defend? The legacy of this crisis is clear. The world is moving toward a multipolar monetary order. The era of dollar dominance and Western financial hegemony is over. The asset seizure and retaliation didn't cause this shift, but they accelerated it dramatically. Financial power is now disputed among competing currency blocks and financial centers. London, New York, and Frankfurt face new competition from Asia and the Middle East. Alternative financial ecosystems are rising, with trade and investment flowing through parallel networks. The global economy is more complex and resilient, but also more contentious. The weaponization of finance has changed the rules of global power. Restoring trust will be the defining challenge of the coming decades. The world of money has entered a new, uncertain era, one that will never be the same.